And then I actually apparently have not been paying that much attention to the news today because Andy told me when I walked in that we also lost Dwayne Wiggins from Toni. So we are losing the greats and want to take a minute to appreciate them as they transition. So we are also continuing our conversation about the thing. There are many things, maybe, right, but certainly one thing that sort of shaped the conversation, the political conversation of the week, was the State of the Union. Whether you watched or you did not watch the State of the Union, the one thing that you certainly know by now is that Representative Al Green of Texas stood up during the joint session, joint address, and took Trump to task for his lies and threats to Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security. He was very clear both during and after that his protest was a protest of conscience and morality. And after that, he was very clearly concerned about a set of issues, right? And that the programs that we are seeing under threat from the Trump administration, that cuts to those programs will destroy lives in his district and across the country. But he also said that he was willing to accept whatever punishment that Republicans were prepared to hand out because his protest was righteous. And he was okay with whatever they were going to do. And the punishment came swiftly. Representative Green was censured in the House the very next day. Now, mind you, when Joe Walsh called Obama a liar at the State of the Union, he was not censured. When Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert screeched at Joe Biden in 23 and again in 2024, they were not censured. But apparently censure wasn't enough for the Republican majority in the House. They have introduced resolutions to have not only Representative Green kicked off of his committees, but every single Democrat who stood in solidarity with him in the well of the House. While Republicans tried to shame him, they want them kicked off their committees too. So now, obviously, kicking Congressional Black Caucus members and other Democrats off of committees is an absolute red line. I think we have a clip, Andy, of Leader Hakeem Jeffries and what he had to say about these efforts.
I'm here in the office, just finished up a telephone town hall meeting with my dynamic sister, our Attorney General, Tish James, and my team informs me that some far-right extremists have introduced a resolution to try to throw Democratic members of the House off of our committees. That resolution is going nowhere. You ain't throwing no one off of any single committee. These people are malignant clowns. Andy Ogles is a fraud, a complete and total fraud. You aren't throwing anyone off of any committee in the House of Representatives. Don't make me expose you to folks who don't know you.
So I love when Representative Jeffries just refuses to code switch. When he just says what he means. And so I think that what that's a demonstration of is that the Democrats are not going to allow their members to be thrown off committees. And we can talk some other time, and maybe we will a little bit later with our guest, about why committees are so important and what we're seeing, the attacks that we're actually seeing on the committees. But it's also important to note that there were 10 House Democrats who crossed the aisle to censure their own, who crossed the aisle to censure Representative Green for, quote, breach of conduct, right? They were clutching their pearls at the fact that he stood up and spoke truth to power. And in many ways, I think that those Democrats, those 10 Democrats who censured their own for his righteous protest, in many ways are no different from those who Dr. King described in his letter from a Birmingham jail. He said, "You deplore the demonstrations taking place, but your statement fails to express a similar concern for the conditions that brought about the demonstrations. So we think about, them talking about the decorum of Representative Green, but not about the issues that they as a caucus are about to have to address in terms of the threats to Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security. Dr. King said the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizens counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice. And I think that is so much of what we're seeing from some Democrats right now. And it's a good thing that y'all are staying on their phone lines because you need to help them shore up their spine to do the right thing in this moment. When we come forward, we are going to be joined by Chris Towler, the principal investigator of the Black Voter Project. And I want to talk to him about both what we're seeing in Congress right now, but also what they are learning from voters, from Black voters about this moment. And we'll talk a little bit about their most recent set of findings that I think are both fascinating for all of us to know about. So when we come forward, we'll have that conversation. Stay with us. This is KBLA Talk 1580. You are listening to the Black Pack. I'm Adrienne Shropshire, and we are joined by Chris Towler. Chris, I'm glad to have you on. I want to talk a little bit about what we're seeing in Congress right now. Someone in the comments on the live on YouTube asked me to name the names of the 10 Democrats who voted to censure Rep. Green, and I'm gonna do that. But before I do that, I want to just get your thoughts on what we're seeing right now. I mean, we saw again the sort of, I guess the one question would be like, what kind of message actually does it send? Right, when we see Democrats joining the other side of the aisle, which we know is anti-democratic, right? That is undermining every institution, dismantling, in support of dismantling all of our government agencies. What kind of message does that send? One, and then two, I want to talk about what we're seeing in committees, especially since they're, part of the resolutions that got put forward today were about yesterday were about removing Democrats from committees.
Well, thanks so much for having me back on the show. Happy to be here and excited to talk with you. I think, from what I study, which is primarily Black public opinion and political behavior, the general attitude around the State of the Union speech was, especially for representatives, either don't show up, or if you're going to show up, do something.
Right.
Make it be known that you do not support what's going on. And I think Representative Green did that. And, the overwhelming sentiment amongst my circle is that, most, if not all, Democrats should have walked out with him and followed him out of the speech altogether. But the censoring that's taking place is really just another reflection of something that I'll hopefully get a chance to talk about in the data, which is really that there's a sense amongst the Black community that there's not really room for them in politics, especially in the Republican Party, but maybe not even in the Democratic Party as well. And that there's really no sense that Black attitudes, Black representation, Black politics is important or valued or considered something worth standing up for. And I think that's what, what's being sort of reflected in these 10 Democrats who did end up voting to censure Representative Green, 3 of whom were also strongly pushing for Biden to drop out as well and move forward, in the presidential race. So
yeah. That's right. Well, I'm glad you brought up this the sort of debate before the State of the Union, because I certainly, at least from my perspective, we were saying to all Democrats, but certainly the Congressional Black Caucus, that they should not go. Right, that they should not give him an audience, that they should not give him an opportunity to demean our community, to attempt to humiliate our community, to give him the made-for-TV moments that he desires. Right, that they should stay home. Right, and they different members and certainly the leadership had a whole host of reasons why they thought that it was important for Democrats to be in attendance. And even for those who did walk out, because there were about 20 of them who walked out after Representative Green was removed. And they sort of gave their reasons for being there in the first place. Some folks said that there was sort of a procedural thing where they didn't want for their seats to be filled by, Republican staffers, and that if they didn't claim their seat at the beginning, that it would have been filled, but when they left, during the speech, that their seat would remain empty. But it just felt like, much like the Oval Office visit with Zelensky, that it really was about posturing. It really was about cowing people. It really was about being hostile, right? And when we think about the president of the United States being hostile to members of Congress, they're really being hostile to their constituents, right? And so I think that's when we think about that debate ahead of time, it really was, from my perspective, it was why give him that, right? He craves attention. Why give him attention?
Yep, and Trump has a history of sort of searching for moments to be hostile specifically to Black representation. And it takes me back to the interview he did with the National Association of Black Journalists, where it was a real intentional attempt to have sort of a power, to show power over Black people. And I think despite the powerful statement that Representative Green made, ultimately this played into his hands, into MAGA's hands, and in their ability to show that they're in power and they can control Black representatives and, in turn, as you mentioned, right, Black constituents and voters.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So let me ask you about, some of the data that you all are seeing. I mean, I think that and tell me what the sort of sentiment around, the idea of Black representation in politics right now and in political institutions right now. And I asked that question about is there a sentiment that you all see around that question because of this threat, right, to kick members off of their committees. We saw how outrageously Representative Ayanna Pressley was treated the other day on her committee when she tried to read, a title of an article into the record that was about, the sort of lie around immigrant communities. And we were just talking to Nana Jumphy about black immigrants. She tried to read into the record the lie around crimes being committed by immigrants, and was now I'm doing decorum, right? Like trying to find the words, right? Like treated very badly, right? Treated very harshly, treated in an incredibly offensive way. And so I just wonder about the importance, right, of Black political representation right now, and how the voters that you all are talking to, how they see the idea of the importance of representation.
I think for Black voters, especially Black voters who are feeling somewhat disillusioned and down after the election, it's that much more important for them to see Black representation and to see their voices and their sort of identity uplifted within the Democratic Party and national politics as much as possible. And to see not people sort of turning against Black representatives speaking out and speaking up for Black people, but embracing that. When we ended up collecting a post-election survey as part of the Black Voter Project election series. And so we had data towards the second half of December where we actually talked to people a final time after the election. And interestingly enough, when thinking about representation, we asked people what sort of the top characteristics or attributes of they'd like to see in the next Democratic candidate. And the top attribute was having a candidate that was Black. And so Black voters, compared to things such as being politically experienced, having a high education, even being sort of young in age, this idea of not wanting older representation, through it all, even after Harris has lost, the number one, the thing most important to Black voters they're looking for in the next Democratic candidate is having someone that represents them and represents their race. And I think that really, the idea of this is not only there in this type of direct representation and descriptive representation, but it also shows, as you mentioned with Presley's, the the clip going around of Presley trying to enter something into the record that's being denied, and the sort of procedural impacts that she has, aside from necessarily just passing policy or even speaking up for people, being there and having her voice and the voice of her constituents on the record, challenging power structures, and as you mentioned, speaking truth to power is something that's extremely important, right? And is almost one of these intangible things that goes into understanding Black representation.
Mm-hmm. So I want to talk a little bit about, I want to go back, right? Or maybe look backwards, perhaps, right? And so you and I talked about before about this sort of narrative that was emerging around the campaign, right? This sort of narrative that there was going to be this massive racial realignment of Black voters, right, behind Donald Trump. We, coming out of the election, we, understand that he may have made some gains, right? But I think my question for you is maybe two. And so one is, what is the evidence of this sort of, gains that he made in some places? Is there actual evidence of that? Is that really the case? And then the other question is, we did not see, as had been predicted by, every pundit in the country, that there was going to be this massive racial realignment, political realignment, and yet they're still talking about it. You know what I mean? And so, we can't get beyond, it's like, don't believe your lying eyes, right? We sort of can't get beyond this ongoing, narrative, and Trump does it too, right? It's a part of the propaganda at this point. But why can we not get beyond it? And is it because we really did see shifts that allow people to continue to try and force this argument? So
from what I've seen, there's absolutely no evidence of a racial realignment, especially when it comes to Black voters. Mm-hmm. Looking at general data or the data that I've collected with the Black Voter Project, Black voters supported Harris at almost exactly the same rate that they supported Biden in 2020. And only about 12% of the Black community reported voting for Trump, again, almost identical to the support he got in 2020. Moreover, a lot of the discourse around this racial realignment was with Black men. And my data actually suggests that Black men, when it was all said and done, supported Harris at slightly higher rates than they supported Biden in 2020. Where I have about 82% of Black men saying that they voted for Kamala Harris for president.
Right.
And so the evidence suggests nothing of the sort when it comes to a racial realignment. If anything, we might be able to make an argument for a slight adjustment of Latino voters when it came to their understanding of sort of the candidate that's best for them. But overall, no evidence of a racial realignment, especially when it comes to Black voters.
And so
now, when it comes to understanding how this conversation is continuing and why we keep hearing about it, I think what we can say is that it was somewhat effective in driving down turnout and creating this idea that there might be little, less difference between the two candidates than we're being told, building some sense of false equivalency between the Democrats and Republicans and their ideas that they're putting forth and whether or not someone is actually good or bad for the Black community. And we did see turnout drop significantly across the board, especially in some of the more urban areas where you have more Black voters.
Right. And that's, I think, again, to your point, I think that demonstrates the effectiveness of the propaganda campaign, right? The effectiveness of a lot of the dis and misinformation that we were, that everyone was sort of warning about, but the campaign didn't seem to be able to get on top of that or to disrupt that in a way that would impact people's participation. And so I can see that now, too, as being, as we head into off-year elections and as we head into the midterms, part of the reason that we're still hearing that narrative or that narrative is still being pushed is because it again can have impact, right, on people's willingness to participate in the upcoming elections. And I know we talk a lot about 26 and at the federal level, but it's also important, I think, for folks to remember that there are local and state elections this year in many places around the country. And so it's still so we still have a problem, right? We still have a problem with making sure that people are getting accurate information, that people understand the distinctions, et cetera. So, Chris, when we come forward, I want to talk a little bit about the data, about what you are seeing in the top lines in about your study. I think there's just a lot of great data there that's important for us to try and uncover and let people know about. So stay with us. This is KBLA Talk 1580. You're listening to the Black Pack, and we will be back with Chris Towler from the Black Voter Project. You are listening to the Black Pack, and we are talking with Chris Towler of the principal investigator. So every time I say that, I want to ask you, what does the principal investigator do?
In my case, as the principal investigator or director of the Black Voter Project, for years I've pretty much done everything. It's been a project that has been my baby, and I've sort of built from the ground up over the years. I've had the opportunity to work with some wonderful co-PIs. This most recent election survey, I worked with Professor Christopher Parker at UC Santa Barbara, who is an expert in sort of Black politics and public opinion as well. And so that, offered so much more insight and expertise to this round of the survey. But for the most part, right, I've taken on at times everything from designing the survey to programming the survey to testing the survey, collecting sample, analyzing data, pretty much anything
all the
you can
things
think of that goes into goes into completing such a project.
All the things. I love it. I both when I say it and I see it, I think I want that on my business card too. Principal investigator for you of the Black Voter Project. So I wanted to talk when we talked last. I think when we talked last, you all were in the wrapping up the final round of the 2024 Black Voter Study, and so we were going to come back and talk about that piece of it. And so I'm wondering that when we think about all that happened in 2024, and again just sort of looking back, and we know there's some looking forward that we need to do as well. What did you all find in terms of top lines that stood out to you about Black voters and their role and their participation in the 2024 election?
Yeah, so last time we talked, we had just wrapped up the final and fourth wave of the survey, which ended up being a post-election wave, which we fielded in December. We surveyed about 665 Black respondents across the country. 93% of those we surveyed were people from previous waves of the survey, which means that we can go back and actually look at differences in opinions and attitudes with these people before and after the election and throughout the election cycle. And so as I mentioned, right, we're able to not only understand sort of top lines, but also track public opinion and attitudes during this entire campaign. I think some of the most interesting things that came out, aside from understanding just vote choice, right, was looking at attitudes, particularly towards the Democratic Party and how Black people feel about politics moving forward. And so as I mentioned, a lot of Black people, our survey results suggest that there's a significant amount of Black people that saw the Democratic Party as more welcoming to them throughout the course of the campaign, such that in wave one, when we collected data in April, about 28% of the people we surveyed said that the Democratic Party was extremely welcoming to Black people. That jumped up to 36% in August. Again, we're talking to the same people, so people changed their minds. Up to 36% in August once Harris became the nominee. And then it jumped even further up to 42%. Almost half of Black people that we were talking to said that the Democratic Party was extremely welcoming to them by the time we were in wave 3 in October. And so we saw this steady increase in positive perceptions towards the Democratic Party and its, the space for Black people. However, in wave 4, we saw a decline there where it dropped from 42% to 35%, slightly lower even than wave 2 after the election, where only 35% said the Democratic Party was extremely welcoming to Black people, suggesting that this sort of push with Harris was changing perceptions of how Black people viewed the Democratic Party, seeing it as more welcoming. But we saw a somewhat sharp reversal of that following the election. And, we've been doing focus groups the last couple of weeks, talking to Black people more individually and in group settings across the country. Mm-hmm. And that sentiment is persisting, that they want to see the Democratic Party fight. They're worried that the Democratic Party is going to turn away from Black voters and Black representation because of Harris's loss.
And so when you're talking to folks in the groups, does it seem like folks feel like it's going to be kind of business as usual in these off-year elections and also as we head into the midterms in 2026, or are there opportunities for engaging Black voters that you have been able to glean from those conversations or even from the post-election analysis?
There's absolutely opportunities to engage Black voters. However, the Black voters who were sort of on the fence and maybe sat out 2024 after voting in 2020 or maybe voting for Obama previously, those Black voters are even more apathetic and disillusioned than before. And so another important finding that I wanted to point out from the survey is we also asked people whether or not a second Trump presidency would motivate them to become more committed to politics, or if, on the other hand, they viewed a second Trump presidency as exhausting and they kind of just wanted to be left alone. And what our results suggest is that 43% of people felt they wanted to be left alone, with only 23% saying they were motivated and committed to politics following the election. Even more so, when we look at that breakdown by gender, a whole 51% of Black women said that they saw a second Trump presidency as more exhausting and really just wanted to be left alone following the election. And so there are opportunities there,
big.
But
that's a big number for Black women
in
particular.
People are worn out. Yeah, people are worn out. People feel, a little less hopeful. There's less positive perceptions of the Democratic Party as a whole. And so there's going to need to be a lot of work put in on the ground and through messaging to re-engage Black voters and not only bring them back into the fold, but as we've seen, increase turnout so that we surpass 2024 and get closer to 2020 numbers and beyond.
Yeah, so I mean that it is the thing that is striking about that. Not is just, not surprising certainly, right? Like there's a greater sense of apathy and disillusion among voters who didn't participate in 24. But what is striking to me is that in order to have the kinds of conversations that need to be had with those voters, that work actually has to begin right now. And there's always this tendency, right, certainly within the Democratic ecosystem, to not talk to those folks until the very last minute, right? And so I wonder if folks feel that, right? If voters feel that sort of, we can put you on the back burner and wait until the last minute and talk to you. Does that come through, that people see that sort of being taken for granted as an actual real thing?
I think it does come through, and I think some of our data speaks to that in a more detailed way, where we also asked people whether or not they had been contacted by the Harris campaign or someone sort of working for Harris. And what we found is that 41% of voters said that they were never contacted at all. And we asked about different modes of contact, things such as email, text message, social media, in-person contact, so on and so forth. But when we looked at that by age groups, a whole 52% of 18 to 29-year-olds said that they had weren't touched by the Biden or by the Harris campaign. Right? They were not contacted. And of those who did not vote in 2020, another 56% said that they did not receive any type of contact. So, there's a higher rate of non-contact in the groups, right, looking back, that probably needed the most contact to get out to vote, to get off the couch and possibly turn the tide in some of these swing states.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of work cut out for us, because I think that, as you know, that this work is not just about getting people to vote, but it really is about the broader, small d democratic participation and the need for folks to be active in civic life for a whole host of reasons, right? Not just to get folks elected, but to make sure that we're driving policy and getting having the kind of moving the kind of agenda that's necessary to improve the lives of our communities. And so, if we can't get folks to participate in voting, we can't get them to participate in anything else. So a lot of work to do, and I appreciate the data and the analysis that you all are putting out there and providing, because it gives a blueprint, right? It says that it helps us to see these are the things and the places and the folks that we need to focus on. So want to, again, as always, appreciate you for the work that you all are doing and for sharing the data that you all have with us on the show, but also broadly. So again, Chris Towler, the principal investigator at the Black Voter Project, I want to thank you for joining us again, and then hope to have you back on soon.
Thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
Of course. When we come forward, we're going to talk about a new show that is going to be airing on KBLA Talk 1580 tomorrow, really focusing on the Altadena fire and the rebuilding of that will have to happen with residents who have been displaced and sometimes overlooked and forgotten. So we're going to talk about that when we come forward. Stay with us. This is KBLA Talk 1580. This is the Black Pack. I'm your host, Adrienne Shropshire, and joining us now is James Farr, the host of the new KBLA show starting tomorrow called Conversation Live, Altadena Rising. So welcome to the Black Pack, James.
Sister Adrienne, thank you so much for having me. Such a pleasure to be here on the Black Pack. Wow, this is nice.
Well, I appreciate you joining us and talking to us a little bit about the show. So it's premiering tomorrow. It's called Conversation Live, Altadena Rising. Tell us a little bit about the show. First of all, tell us the time for tomorrow.
Well, the show premieres live tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard. That's 1 o'clock on the East Coast. And then there's a replay on Sunday at 12 noon Pacific Standard and 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for folks. So they'll be able to, if they missed it on Saturday live, they can certainly catch it Sunday after they get out of church. Yeah.
So folks will have two opportunities to catch it over the weekend. So 10 a.m. Pacific on Saturday live, and then rebroadcast on noon on Sunday. So tell us a little bit about the show and how you're going to be focusing Altadena in the show.
Absolutely. As many are familiar with, and then some aren't, kind of outside of our Los Angeles region. But on January 7th of this year, Altadena was scorched, torched, and burned to the ground in a massive fire that is beyond comprehension, Sister Adrienne. And so we're talking about thousands of Black folks and Altadenians that have been displaced. Over 11,000 structures were essentially burned to the ground. Mm-hmm. Altadena was an African-American enclave where, upwards of 80% of the African-American and our folks that lived there were homeowners. So it was a community that was steeped in generational wealth, mm-hmm. tradition, culture. I mean, it was just kind of like this utopia, kind of, if Wakanda really existed, it might have been there.
In the foothills.
in the foothills. And so, we know what happened in the fire. And so what we're going to do with the show is we are the show of record. We're going to chronicle this journey for rebuilding. We're going to talk about the recovery. Mm-hmm. We're going to talk about reunions. But before we can do that, we have to kind of talk about the origin, right? Like mm-hmm. the roots.
Yeah.
And so as you're aware, Black folks have been in Altadena since well into the late 1800s. So we want to bring the audience into a complete understanding of that community.
I love that. So it's both telling the history of Altadena, why it is such an important kind of cultural center for Black folks in the Los Angeles region. I am going to appreciate that, and I hope that others will too. We know that Altadena was, overlooked in many ways during the course of the fires. The media coverage largely focused in many ways on the Palisades. I can remember during that first few days, right? Remembering, saying that the only people that the people that I know that have lost their homes are people in Altadena, and that's just about the connections of our community, right? But a lot was being missed in the coverage of the fires. But you were on the ground, right, in the immediate aftermath, covering what was going on. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of Black media, right, in elevating the stories of our people, and particularly in moments of tragedy like this?
Absolutely. I mean, I have the duality of being someone that lives in this community. I live on the border of Altadena, and so I was amongst the first to have to evacuate. And I consider myself extremely fortunate that I did have notification from the police who came through my neighborhood on a PA system about 8:30 on the 7th, telling us to leave now. Mm-hmm. That being said, as we kind of become conditioned to, we don't see coverage of us. Palisades dominated the coverage. Yeah. It also was the fire that started first, right? Yeah. And so in my instance, once I learned that my home was okay, and then I woke up on the 8th hearing from scores of friends who live on a completely other side of town. I'm closer to Eaton, and I'm finding out the news as they're finding out, and then in some cases they didn't know. So I immediately returned back to my home, grabbed my camera, grabbed my photographer, and we hit the streets. And, some of the things that we saw in the early stages still was smoky. Yeah. There were still fires burning. Right. But to your question, Black media has to tell this story. If we don't do it, KBLA Talk 1580, as you know, is the only talk radio station west of the Mississippi. It's duty. Yeah. And I'm honored that Tavis Smiley has saw fit to provide this platform for us to tell this for the next 52 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah. And it will be, the history of Altadena is important. Understanding what happened, during the course of that, week or so of the fires, I think, the missteps, right, the alerts that didn't go out, that's important. But it's also going to be important to talk about the challenges of rebuilding, the challenges that families are facing. And I know that there's a lot of, families who, generations of family members lost their homes, right? And sort of telling that story and the challenges of rebuilding. I've heard lots of people, already making comparisons to Hurricane Katrina, right? And the sort of worry and concern about whether or not we can bring our community back. So the all of it together, right, will be an important story to tell. And I wonder if you're hearing some of that now, right, of concerns of community members about the ability and the wherewithal to actually rebuild what was and what will be again Altadena.
Right. Yeah. As an observer, as someone that has the privilege and responsibility of bearing witness to folks in their struggle, their challenges to rebuild, what's happening, Sister Adrienne, is there's not a light switch, right? There's not a universal solution for the thousands of people who are obviously have survived with their lives. There were about, I believe, 18 souls that perished here in the fire in Altadena. So the stories and the challenges are similar yet different. It has a lot of uniqueness in each individual person's situation. So we're going to bring forward as many of those stories as we can and kind of balance them off with, some joy, some history, some art, and just the nostalgia of Altadena. But yes, we are hearing people selling homes or land at what you and I may think is under what they should be paid for. But I think we also have to give some grace and space and allow people the opportunity to decide what's in their best interest. Yeah. Because the situations are so different. And so my folks outside of the area, allow the people to make the best decisions for them. This is a long, long road.
A long, long road. Yeah, I know that. The folks that I know are all in different places, right? With both dealing with insurance companies. There's some folks who have joined the lawsuits. There's everyone is in a different place, and it's gonna look different. I want to ask you one more time as we close out here to tell folks one more time the details, the deets on the show starting tomorrow.
Absolutely. Tomorrow is our premiere episode at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. There's a replay on Sunday at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Folks can obviously download the KBLA Talk 1580 app. They can listen to it via the website. And if they're in their cars, in their homes, doing what you do on a Saturday, mid-morning, I want to invite you into the show, and I appreciate you allowing me to come into your homes or wherever you are occupying and share this story over the next 52 weeks.
So I really appreciate you coming on and talking to us about the show. I will be listening tomorrow morning. I'm excited about your show. Both what you said, like giving us telling us what's happening, but also making sure to incorporate that with joy and culture and history. I really appreciate the way that you've conceptualized the show. So thank you for joining us. Thank you all for joining me here once again on a Friday afternoon. I appreciate you all joining and listening in and catching up on what has happened throughout the week. I will be back next Friday, 4 to 6 p.m., as you know, right here with the Black Pack. Please try and have a great weekend. This is KBLA Talk 1580.